The memory under the tree. A man is starving beside a river, not because there is no food, because he is afraid of pleasure. For 6 years, he has pushed his body toward death, chasing something he cannot name. The early discourses describe him touching his stomach and feeling his spine through it. They describe a roaring in his ears as he holds his breath until the world tilts. Another account remembers stretches when he lived on a single grain of rice a day. His name is Siddhartha Gautama. He has already reached the highest meditative attainments 2 famous teachers could offer. Neither one set him free. Picture it plainly. A man who has mastered everything his world called mastery, sitting by a river, dying of it. Then a memory surfaces, not summoned, arriving, the way a smell arrives before you remember the room it belongs to. He is a child again, sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree while his father works a field nearby. No teacher is present. No technique. No search for anything at all. And joy comes anyway. Quiet, full, uninvited. The discourse records the question that turned the rest of his life. Could that be the path to awakening? Sit with that question for a moment. A man at the edge of collapse, remembering a boy at rest. We'll come back to why that gap matters more than it first appears. The state he remembered had a name, Jhana. The early texts map 4 ascending stages of it. 25 centuries later, Buddhists still argue over what those stages require. Some say the senses shut down completely. Others say the body stays present within it. A third reading says concentration and insight were never separate at all. Hold all 3 of those positions loosely. We'll return to each one, with names attached, later. First, you need to see the road he'd already walked, because the memory only makes sense against what he'd already tried and abandoned. A story before the theory. Years later, a discourse would preserve this. 500 carts passed one by one along a road. A traveler walking behind them found a man sitting a short distance off, awake, conscious, his robe covered in their dust. He had neither seen nor heard a single one of 500 carts pass by. The man was Ariyapariyesanā. For the wandering ascetics of that era, the Shramanas, the strivers, who had given up houses and names to solve one problem, the mind's bondage to suffering, this was the mark of the highest attainment. Consciousness pulled back beyond the reach of ordinary sensation. This was the world young Siddhartha walked into when he left home. Under Aṅguttara Nikāya, he reached his teacher's own summit, a formless state called the sphere of nothingness. Aṅguttara was so impressed he offered the young renunciant equal standing. Lead this community beside me. He said no, and went looking for something further. Under a second teacher, Uddaka Ramaputta, he reached a state so refined the texts can only name it by paradox. Neither perception nor non-perception. When he arrived there, Uddaka placed him in the teacher's own seat. 2 communities, 2 thrones offered to a man barely into his 20s. He turned both down. Notice that, if nothing else, before we move on, mastery came easily to him. It was never the problem. The Ariyapariyesanā Sutta preserves his own reasoning. This teaching does not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to awakening. It leads only to rebirth in that very dimension, profound, refined, and still inside the wheel. So he tried the opposite road. 6 years of self-starvation with 5 companions, on the bet that the body itself was the obstacle standing between him and freedom. The bet failed. He stood, quite literally, at the end of both roads available to a serious seeker in his world. The road of ever subtler concentration and the road of ever harsher denial, and knew, at the end of each, that he was still bound. Which is exactly why the rose apple memory breaks the pattern of everything he had tried. it doesn't sit further along either road. It points off both of them entirely. And notice what the memory actually contains. Joy, pleasure, the very things 6 years of starvation were built to destroy. The Mahāsaccaka Sutta records him asking himself something that might be the strangest line in the entire text. Why am I afraid of that pleasure? Read that twice. This is a man who has endured levels of pain most of us could not survive a single afternoon of. And the thing he names as frightening is joy. The logic of his whole ascetic path rested on a straight line. Pleasure feeds craving. Craving feeds bondage. Therefore, pleasure is the enemy. Starve the senses and you starve the chains. Then he looked at the memory more closely, and the line broke. The joy under the rose apple tree hadn't come from acquiring anything, consuming anything, winning anything. It arose from seclusion. The discourse's own words are, unconnected with sensuality, unconnected with unskillful states. His conclusion, set down plainly in the text. There was no reason to fear a pleasure like that. And then the realization the sutta states outright. That is the path to awakening. So he did something his 5 companions could not forgive. He accepted food, rice, porridge, later remembered in tradition as the bowl of milk rice from Sujata, though the earliest discourse simply says, he ate. Picture the 5 men watching him lift the bowl. In their eyes, a man who had gone this far, who had come this close, had softened, had gone back to abundance, had quit. They walked away in disgust and left him alone by the river. They saw betrayal. He had seen a doorway. One breath here before we go further. Hold both readings of that same meal in your mind at once. 5 men see collapse. 1 man sees the only door he hasn't tried. That gap between 2 honest witnesses to the same event is going to matter again, several times, before this story ends. The discourse identifies the state under that childhood tree as the first jhana, the opening stage of a progressive settling of the mind. Buddhist teaching ties its arrival to the quieting of 5 specific disturbances: sensory craving, hostility, dullness, agitation, paralyzing doubt. 5 habits of an unsettled mind: attention pulled, pushed, clouded, shaken, or frozen. While they rule, the mind can no more settle than churned water can turn clear. Try this for 1 second, wherever you're sitting. Notice which of the 5 is loudest in you right now. Not to fix it, just to notice it's there, running quietly under everything else you're doing today. That noticing, not the fixing, is most of what this practice actually is. And here's where an old distinction quietly answers a very modern question. We live in an era that can reach dramatic altered states through a dozen doors, some of them chemical, available in a single afternoon. In the Buddhist framework, what gives jhana its meaning was never the intensity of the state itself. It's the training that produced it, training that specifically quiets craving, hostility, and confusion, rather than bypassing them. The altered state is the surface. The conditions underneath are what carry the meaning. 4 stages sit above this first settling, each one climbed by dropping something. Let's walk them slowly, because rushing through this part is exactly where most retellings of this story lose the thread. Here is the strangest property of this ladder, and it shows itself immediately. You climb it by dropping things. Every stage upward is defined by what falls away from the one below it. By the 4th stage, even pleasure itself has been set down, and what the texts say remains is an unusually refined form of well-being. The Sāmaññaphala Sutta gives each stage twice, once as plain description, once as an image so physical you can almost feel it on your skin. Let's take them one at a time, with room to breathe between each. The first jhana, secluded from sensual desire, secluded from unskillful states. Two mental movements remain here, vitakka and vikara, usually translated as directed and sustained thought. Attention still places itself somewhere and holds there, the way a hand rests deliberately on a surface. Out of that seclusion, two qualities arise, and the texts are careful to keep them separate. Piti, rapture, the energizing thrill, the rush of uplift, and sukha, the steadier pleasure and ease underneath it. What remains once the thrill itself has settled? The image. A bath attendant working powder into water, kneading it by hand until moisture reaches every grain. Nothing dry inside, nothing dripping out. Notice this image still contains effort, a hand still doing the work. But something strange happens at the next stage. The very effort that got you here starts to work against you. Even the hand has to let go. The second jhana. The directed movements fall silent. The early texts pair this stage with a phrase worth sitting with on its own: noble silence. Some modern practitioners describe it as the end of inner commentary, the narrator in your head finally going quiet, not suppressed, just finished talking. Piti and sukha remain, but their source has changed. No longer born from effort, now born from unification, from things settling into one, rather than being held together by hand. The image. A lake with no inlet, no stream feeding it, no rain falling into it, filled entirely by a spring welling up from underneath, on its own. One aside worth carrying forward. In the Aṅguttara Nikāya, the monk who receives this teaching on noble silence is Moggallana. Remember that name. It comes back, and when it does, it complicates everything you're about to hear about silence. A brief aside on resemblance. Athletes and climbers sometimes describe a zone where the inner voice stops and time bends. The resemblance is real but shallow. Their states are built around action, this one around stillness. Still, the silence itself, they'd recognize. The third jhana. Now even piti is released. Its energetic charge starts to feel coarse next to the quieter contentment underneath it. What stays is sukha alone, pleasure without excitement, held in equanimity and clear awareness. The texts give this stage their most understated line of praise. Equanimous and mindful, one abides in pleasure. The image. Lotuses, rooted and growing entirely underwater, saturated with coolness from root to tip. The fourth jhana. Pleasure and pain are both set down. Gladness and grief have already faded before this stage even begins. What the formula names as remaining is purity of equanimity and mindfulness. Listen carefully here, because this stage gets mistaken for something it isn't. Emotional flatness. The texts describe the opposite of dullness. Mindfulness at its most purified, awareness at its cleanest, precisely because nothing pleasant or painful is tugging at it anymore. A scale reads its smallest, truest weight only when it's perfectly balanced. The image. A man wrapped head to foot in clean white cloth, nothing left uncovered. Take the four images together, once, before we move on. A hand kneading powder into water, a spring rising on its own, lotuses steeped from below, a body wrapped completely in white. Across that sequence, deliberate effort gives way, quietly, to something that simply soaks through you, without you doing it. Now hold a question, and don't let go of it yet. A monk sits in the fourth jhana. Outside, a storm breaks. Rain hammering the roof. Lightning splitting a tree nearby. What, if anything, does he experience of it? Keep that question. Whole Buddhist communities will spend centuries disagreeing about the answer, and the argument is still running today, in meditation halls and under laboratory electrodes. We'll come back to it. Twice. The Mahāsaccaka Sutta continues past the rose apple memory. He ate. He recovered his strength. He sat beneath a tree at Uruvela and, in the account, climbed these 4 stages through a single night. The formula describes the mind that came out the other side. Concentrated, purified, bright, pliant, steady, imperturbable. And only then did he turn that mind toward knowledge, first toward past lives, then toward the rise and fall of all beings, and finally toward the knowledge that ended his own bondage. Mark that sequence carefully, because it corrects the single most common distortion of this whole teaching. The awakening is placed after the 4th jhana. Launched from it, the platform steady enough for a mind to finally see what it had spent a lifetime looking away from. The 2 roads he'd tried before this, the teacher's formless heights, the ascetic's starvation, both demanded more mastery, more subtlety, more deprivation. The remembered path began, instead, with release. And it makes one of the boldest claims in the whole tradition. The most refined happiness available to a human being is reached by putting happiness down. 4 stages. So what were the other 4? The ones Adar and Uddaka had already reached before Siddhartha ever sat down at Uruvela? The sphere of infinite space, where the perception of form dissolves and awareness opens onto boundlessness. The sphere of infinite consciousness, attention turning from that boundless space toward the awareness that had been perceiving it. The sphere of nothingness, Ara Kalama's own summit. The sphere of neither perception nor non-perception, Uddaka's, and before him, Rama's, a state so subtle that perception can no longer be called simply present or absent. The standard early formulas keep these 4 ayatanas, spheres, distinct from the 4 jhanas. Later traditions commonly folded all 8 into one ascending ladder, with the formless heights sitting above the jhanas in refinement, without carrying any greater power to liberate. That distinction is easy to read past quickly. Don't. Depth of state and depth of freedom, the tradition insists, run on separate tracks entirely. A consciousness can withdraw all the way to the outer edge of perception and come back exactly as bound as when it left. The refinement changes the experience. It does not, on its own, uproot anything. One further attainment sits past even these. The cessation of perception and feeling, where those processes stop outright while the body's vitality and warmth remain, a state extreme enough to deserve a story of its own elsewhere. Some scholars read the 4 jhanas as the Buddha's own distinctive contribution, with the formless spheres inherited from the wider ascetic culture around him. Others caution against drawing that line so cleanly. The question stays open, which by now should sound familiar. Pause on that for a moment. 2 men reached these formless heights before the Buddha ever did, and both offered him their own seat. He said no twice. Keep asking yourself why, because the answer is coming. Here is a warning: the discourse is attached directly to everything above, one that will matter again before this ends. In the Aṅguttara Nikāya, the Buddha describes 2 meditators who reach the exact same jhana. One relishes it, clings to it, and earns nothing more than a refined rebirth. The state has simply become a new home for identity to live in. The other contemplates the very same attainment as conditioned, as impermanent, and turns toward release instead. Same depth, opposite destinations. The state was identical. The grasp decided everything. He granted his old teacher's attainments full reality. He never once suggested Ada or Uddaka had faked anything, and he judged them short of liberation all the same. With that single distinction, the path stopped climbing toward thinner and thinner states of consciousness and turned, instead, toward seeing. A map tested for centuries, described in images you can almost taste. Which makes what happens next to that map genuinely strange. It kept being redrawn by its own most devoted librarians. Follow the word itself for a moment. Jhana in Pali, dhyana in Sanskrit. Carried along the Silk Road into China, where it became Chan. Carried across the sea into Japan, where Chan became Zen. The most famous meditation word on earth descends, syllable by syllable, from exactly the states this story has been mapping. The schools that inherited the name would go on to build very different understandings of practice around it, but the name itself never changed hands. Zen is jhana, carried across 15 centuries and 3 languages. In English, jhana is usually translated as concentration, or increasingly, absorption. Whether either word describes the experience, or quietly reshapes it, is exactly the question this next part opens. The layers built up slowly. The suttas describe the jhanas through images. Bath powder, spring water, lotuses, white cloth, things felt in the body. The Abhidhamma, the great analytical project of early Buddhist scholasticism, examined the same territory through increasingly fine-grained maps of mental factors and their relationships. Then, in 5th century Sri Lanka, the scholar-monk Buddhaghosa gathered the accumulated commentary into a single manual, the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification. He worked faithfully from what he'd inherited, and his synthesis became one of the most influential meditation manuals in the entire Theravada tradition. Inside that synthesis, jhana gained an entrance architecture the discourses themselves never spell out. Preparatory concentration, access concentration, full absorption, a graded sequence of gates. Careful readers of the commentaries have documented that this vocabulary appears throughout them. It never once appears in the canon itself. Kasina practice, using a visual support like an earth disk or a colored disk, does appear in the canonical lists. The manual develops it into one of its most systematic routes into absorption. Different vocabulary doesn't automatically prove a different experience. The commentators may simply have been describing the exact same territory the suttas describe, with finer instruments. But the practical effect, accumulated across centuries and documented in some influential commentarial lineages, is this. Jhana came to mean a very deep absorption, senses fully withdrawn, long preparation required, an explicit and demanding threshold to cross. Was the discourse era experience gentler than that? Could a mind in jhana still hear the world around it? Buddhist communities were already arguing about this astonishingly early. The Vinaya literature preserves a dispute about Moggallana, the same monk who, earlier in this story, received the teaching on noble silence. Moggallana told the community he had heard elephants trumpeting while resting in imperturbable concentration. Other monks concluded this could not possibly be true, and accused him of falsely claiming a superhuman attainment, a charge serious enough, if made knowingly and falsely, to end a monastic career. Sit with the shape of that accusation for a second. This isn't an abstract philosophical dispute. This is one monk's word against a room full of colleagues, his standing in the community on the line, over the question of whether an elephant's trumpet can reach a mind that deep. The Theravada account preserves the Buddha's own ruling. The concentration was genuine, simply not yet fully purified. No offense. Parallel monastic traditions kept the same story, with different endings. In some versions, Moggallana had briefly emerged from the attainment right when the sound reached him. The episode never actually settles the question of sound and absorption. What it demonstrates is older and more valuable than a settled answer. Buddhist communities were already holding different positions on this exact problem, preserved side by side in the earliest layers of the tradition itself. The ambiguity isn't a modern drift. It's present at the roots. Carry the thread one step further. When Burmese reformers built the great lay meditation movements of the 19th and 20th centuries, they inherited this same unresolved question. Must full absorption come first, before insight can even begin? Their answers led to systems that became one of the major foundations of the global Vipassana movement, a story we told in full in our last episode. so no one stole jhana out from under anyone. Successive generations made one particular interpretation increasingly precise, increasingly authoritative, and increasingly difficult to mistake for ordinary calm. Precision preserved the teaching and narrowed the doorway through which later practitioners came to understand it. There, the matter might have rested. But in the late 20th century, a growing network of teachers, translators, and scholars began comparing the commentarial manual directly against the discourse accounts, line by line, image by image. What they found was a manual and a canon that could be read as setting genuinely different thresholds for the same single word. The dispute that followed has a name in the scholarship itself: the Jhana Wars. Today, two respected meditation teachers can use the word jhana and mean noticeably different experiences. Their students argue it out on retreats, in books, in academic papers. Before we get into who says what, sit with how strange that actually is. A word this central, this practiced, this lived in, and no two schools fully agree on what it feels like from the inside. Three positions anchor the field. Each deserves its strongest case, stated fairly. Position 1. Deep absorption. Voices here include Phak Sayadaw in Myanmar and Ajahn Brahm in Australia. Interpretations shaped closely by the commentarial and monastic traditions. For them, jhana means the senses fully withdrawn, the external world genuinely gone, an absorption so complete that hours can pass like minutes. Their argument: the canonical language describes an exceptional transformation of consciousness, and weakening that threshold risks handing an exalted name to ordinary preliminary calm, congratulating yourself at the foothills for reaching the summit. Their strongest canonical exhibit: the same discourse that recorded Attara and the 500 carts also has the Buddha describing his own experience at Atuma. A storm broke while he sat. Lightning killed 2 farmers and 4 oxen nearby. And, awake and conscious, he perceived none of it. The sutta never names which state he was in. For this camp, it's evidence from the founder himself, and a possible answer to the storm question we asked earlier. Position 2. Body-aware absorption. Voices here include Thanissaro Bhikkhu of the Thai forest lineage, and lay teachers like Lee Brasington. Their jhana is deeply unified and profoundly still, but awareness of the body may remain present within it. Their argument leans on the similes themselves: bath powder pervading flesh, lotuses steeped in water, cloth wrapped around limbs, saturated bodily language, which they read as evidence that bodily awareness survives inside the state rather than being erased by it. And the graded entrance machinery, access concentration, preparatory stages, appears nowhere in the canon at all. Read the suttas without the manual, they say, and a different, gentler door appears. Position 3. Jhana as integrated insight. A scholarly reconstruction associated with researchers like Karen Arbel, and it goes furthest of the 3. On this reading, the 4 jhanas were never a separate concentration exercise standing apart from insight at all. They describe a single unfolding process, calm and insight refining together, not one completed before the other begins. Proponents point especially to the Aṅguttara Sutta, where Sariputta is described knowing the mental factors of each attainment as they arise, remain, and subside. Insight, they argue, functioning from inside jhana itself. Critics respond that the passage never quite resolves exactly when or how that discernment occurred. The reconstruction stays contested, and its own advocates say so plainly. 3. Honest positions. Notice something before we move past them. Teachers within each camp disagree with each other too. This was never really 2 sides. It's a spectrum, and everyone on it is reading the same handful of ancient paragraphs as carefully as they know how. Modern neuroscience has added a 4th kind of evidence, of sorts. Early studies relied on single adept practitioners. Newer EEG and imaging work, is beginning to include small groups of experienced meditators, reporting unusual patterns during states they themselves identify as jhana. The samples stay small. No universal neural signature for the 4 stages has been established, and the findings still depend, in the end, on practitioners naming their own states. The same problem the texts have had for 25 centuries, just wearing electrodes now. The laboratories walked into a debate they could measure. They could not settle it. Which raises the real question underneath all of this. Why does this particular argument burn so hot? Remember the 2 meditators from the Aṅguttara Nikāya. Same depth, opposite destinations. The grasp decided everything. Here is the uncomfortable turn this story has been building toward the whole time. The debate itself can become another object of exactly that same grasping. An extraordinary experience hardens into a definition. The definition hardens into an identity. And identities need defending. Sincere practitioners on every side of the Jhana Wars would recognize that mechanism instantly, because it's the very mechanism their own texts diagnosed 25 centuries before the argument had a name. Step back far enough, though, and the whole war changes shape. The question hanging over this entire history: how did the practice sitting at the very center of the path become this contested? Has an answer nobody expects the first time they hear it. The contest is the vital sign. Jhana is taught today on several continents, by rival lineages, under laboratory electrodes, argued over with real heat by people who have given their lives to it. Traditions don't fight over dead things. They only fight, this hard, this long, over something still alive. Which leaves one question underneath everything, the one this story has circled since its very first frame. What did the memory reveal that mastery had concealed? Go back to the beginning. One layer deeper this time. The story gives the child no teacher, no terminology, no theory of altered consciousness at all. Just a boy sitting in the shade while his father worked a field, and an experience arriving unforced before he had any name to put on it. Decades later, an emaciated man by a river finally understood what that moment had been for. Peace required no violence against the body. Pleasure did not always create bondage. And a sufficiently refined, sufficiently settled state could ready a mind for a freedom that still, even after all that stillness, had to be seen, not just felt. The first sermon names right concentration as the final factor of the path. Elsewhere in the early discourses, right concentration is defined through precisely these 4 jhanas. And yet the awakening account keeps going past them. Jhana settled the mind. What the mind was settled for was to be turned, deliberately, toward knowledge. That's what this tradition finally does with altered states of consciousness. The jhanas didn't transform consciousness into an endpoint. They transformed it into a mind the early accounts call concentrated, purified, pliant, ready to be turned toward the seeing that was the entire point of holding still in the first place. And the 25th century argument that followed? Every camp in the Jhana Wars is interpreting the exact same inheritance. Descriptions rich enough, influential enough, and still never quite exhaustive enough to remove all disagreement between honest readers. The child had the experience with no theory attached to it at all. The man, decades later, finally understood what it was for. Everything since, the maps, the manuals, the reforms, the laboratories, the arguments that are still running in comment sections under videos exactly like this one, has been one long, deliberate attempt to walk back to a shade that, the first time, arrived completely unasked. For anyone curious about practice, the description below includes teachers representing each of the 3 major readings we walked through today, because their methods differ almost as much as their definitions do, and it's worth hearing more than one voice before you decide where you land. Tell us in the comments which of the 3 you find most convincing. Deep absorption, body-aware absorption, or jhana, as integrated insight. And if you've sat with any of these states yourself, even briefly, even by accident, we'd genuinely like to hear what it was like in your own words. Our video on the 4 stages of enlightenment shows where this ladder fits inside the larger path. Our episode on the Vipassana movement tells the story of what grew up right alongside it. Stay curious. Stay wise.